Trayson looks pretty typical for an active 4-year-old boy, but he has some behaviors his mom calls quirky. When he talks to people, he tries to answer with dialogue from his favorite movies. Changing from one activity to another is not often a smooth process. Sometimes there are some fits of anger that seem extreme when his parents suggest he do something else. Mom Leola and Dad AJ recognize these quirks as similar behavior common to one of AJ's siblings who has been diagnosed with autism. They took advantage of some early childhood behavior testing available from Alpine School District. After another round of tests involving a specialist, they learned Trayson, too, has autism.
It doesn't make me feel any different about him. So it was good to hear that he needed some help in some areas that I couldn't give him. And so it was kind of nice actually to take a little bit of the burden off my back.
Being a human being, one of the first things you start looking at is the expense. Like, what are therapies going to cost? Where do we put him in school? All of those things. And so it's trying to fit his needs with what we can afford, but also what's available. And it's a little tricky because unfortunately right now, with as aware of autism as we are, there's really only so many places to go for help currently. There's a couple of preschools here and there, but they have just ginormous waiting lists.
AJ and Leola, like parents everywhere, have hopes for Trayson's future, that he'll be accepted by others, that he can find a place in the world, quirky as he may be. But they know his condition will put him on a different path than most others.
They're just slightly off, a little different, and you just gotta be a little patient with them. Try to figure out how to talk to them on their level, and they're still human, they're still people. They deserve as much consideration and manners as anybody else does.
The biggest thing we know now that maybe differentiates Trayson from a lot of other autistic children that I've met or know, he has a desire to be social. And so if we can get him talking and get him to be able to communicate the way that he does socially, we hope that in time we can work him out of the spectrum is the ultimate goal. If not, at least have him to a place where he can be completely self-sufficient. No one would know, unless they've been around other people that have Asperger's or whatever it is, that he even is on the autism spectrum.
Tonight, KBYU-11 offers viewers a chance to ask autism experts questions about the condition that's changed lives for hundreds in Utah. Autism. How do Utah parents find the help to deal with it both for their young children and those maturing to adulthood?
Hello, I'm Rebecca Cressman. Ask 11 is here to answer your questions about autism tonight, and we hope to update you on the latest research regarding the condition, as well as give you resources families looking to deal with autism can turn to. My guests tonight work in part with Brigham Young University's Autism Connect Center in the McKay School of Education. Professor Michael South is on the psychology faculty at BYU. His research interests include the neuropsychology of autism, especially related to how people with autism process emotions. He also sees clients with autism in private practice and helps diagnose the condition in children and adults. Michael's work includes collaboration with Professor Teresa Gabrielson. She's on the school psychology faculty in the McKay School of Education. Before she moved on to higher education, Teresa was a public school psychologist, psychology intern at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Autism Research in Philadelphia. Her research at BYU has to do with training professionals working with people who have autism, early identification of autism, and social skills for teenagers with autism. Both Michael and Teresa publish in scholarly journals about their autism research, and they are frequent speakers at community events where autism is the topic of interest. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
You are also vital to our conversation. Please call us to ask a question of our guests. Our number is 1-855-801-1980. If you prefer, you can also send us an email to ask11@byu.edu with your question. And if you like social media, we're taking questions from Facebook posts or tweets. You just use the handle @KBYU11, and that handle works for both Facebook and Twitter. And if you prefer, you can also use facebook.com/KBYU11 from your browser. So a lot of different ways to get your questions brought in today. Let's at first define What is autism, Teresa?
Autism is a condition that can look different in everyone who has it, but there's a common set of symptoms. We know that there's social communication difficulties in several arenas, and then we also know that there might be some restricted and repetitive behaviors. When we put all these together, a person with autism has difficulty learning in the way that other people learn, and they also have difficulty forming typical social relationships.
All right, it appears to me that we've seen a rise in autism diagnosis. Are we seeing that, and is it an accurate reflection that we have more people with autism now?
Yeah, certainly than even over the last 10 or 20 years. New news out this week is that the prevalence of autism actually stabilized in Utah. It's not, doesn't seem to be going up more.
That's great news.
Yeah.
Some of the reasons for this are have to do with the definitions of autism. So as Teresa said, it's different in every individual, but we see really a wide range of even verbal skills. So some children with autism who don't talk at all, and then some who talk, some of them talk too much and just have a poor sense of social boundaries. So
You brought us a graphic
yeah.
that shows what's happening on the big picture as well for us.
yeah, so what we see, this is an old study, but I think a good one, to just talk about different conditions being diagnosed in California over a 7-year period. And so on the top line here, we have a line of what was being diagnosed with what we now call intellectual disability, with no known cause. So it wasn't Down syndrome where we knew there's
So it's
3
higher
copies.
before, and we're
It's
seeing
higher
fewer
before.
diagnoses
Yeah,
right now.
and at the same time we have the rates of autism here coming up. And so what the authors argued is that many cases that used to, they didn't know what the issue was, they're now diagnosing as autism. And so you sort of have the inverse thing going on. That's one reason.
That's some comfort to me, at least to try to get a bigger picture that we're redefining. We do have a Facebook question that we'd like to take a look at. This Facebook question coming on in. Why is autism in Utah so high? Coming in from Callie, great question.
Sure.
So Utah does a really good job of tracking symptoms. We have cooperation for both the educational system and the healthcare system, and not all states have that luxury. So that's one of the reasons why Utah's up in the higher end.
People are more aware, our health officials are more aware, know what to look for.
Right, we have better cooperation from education and health, and so we're actually capturing more of the kids that have autism in our numbers. Some of the states who don't have the luxury of that cooperation are missing part. You know, they may be missing the educational part, or they may be missing the health records, and it really takes combing through both systems to find all the kids. So we just do a better job.
And how do we identify, or what are some of the symptoms, the early symptoms of diagnosis of autism?
Yeah, so just often parents are looking at difficulty connecting with their child. The child may be interested more in spinning the wheels on cars than playing cars or having some imaginative play. One of the early symptoms people have been looking at for a long time is eye contact. And so I think we have a slide here, if we bring it up, from my mentor, Ami Klin at the Yale Child Study Center, looking at eye contact in infants who are at risk for autism because they had an older sibling with autism.
Okay, and so they're actually making less eye contact than those.
So the eye
who don't
contact
have-
shifts.
So let's take a look at that.
So here we
Explain
go.
this to me.
So what we have here is a picture of this woman playing patty cake and other social games.
Okay.
And on the left here we have the siblings of people who've already been diagnosed with autism. So they have older brothers and sisters. And just wearing a hat that has a camera on it that looks at where their eyes are pointing. And we see in the people at risk for autism, who these later were diagnosed with autism as they got older, they're looking at the hands as she moves her hands, and they're looking at the mouth as she's looking at the mouth. The typical infants without any risk for autism, they're looking at the eyes, and even when she moves her hands, they're looking at the eyes.
Do we know why there's that difference?
We know that people with autism pay attention to different things. That's part of how they learn differently. They're paying attention here to a mouth instead of eyes, which means they're losing all of the social information that the eyes can convey. And these infants in this study were as young as 6 months.
And to me, that's helpful because it shows that they are learning from the world, but they're just learning differently than others.
Right.
We have a tweet that come in, and let's take this one in. Appreciate it. Do you support the organization Autism Speaks, or do you refer people to self-advocacy groups? How do you feel about the idea of curing autism? There's a few questions in there right now. Autism Speaks. Let's talk about that.
So there are several national organizations. Autism Speaks is one organization that does a lot of good in getting information out to parents. They have some invaluable toolkits that are available for free on their website, and every month there's a new one. So I love that resource for parents. I also love the video glossary that Autism Speaks has on their website, because it allows parents to look at videos of children and see what early autism signs look like compared to typical development at that same age.
What about that follow-up question? Is there a cure for autism?
We think of autism as a lifelong condition. However,
I think one way I answer this often when asked is, what do we consider autism to be in the first place? Many people think of it as a different way of being, and it's not that everything's bad, it's just it's different. And it can be hard to fit in the world. It can be hard to fit in schools and workplaces. But some families think that's my quirky child, or that's my quirky sibling, and all right, so that's how it always been.
there's a lot of there are benefits in many cases to people who can have that very intensely focused attention on things that would bore other people. They have a lot of value in the workplace.
We go back to redefining
Yeah.
and looking at life in an expanded view. Let's talk about identifying, because you said quirky. My child may be quirky. We met AJ earlier. They talked about that. What are some of the early signs? If you're concerned or suspicious that your child may have autism, what should we be watching for?
Well, so first of all, every child presents a little bit differently.
Okay.
So you may not know exactly what it is. Talking to some experts can help you. A pediatrician is a good resource. The MCHAT is the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers.
So depending on the age of your child,
Depending on the age of the
how to
child.
get that diagnosis. Okay.
But now you were asking about early signs.
Sure,
right?
early signs.
How do you know?
Right.
Parents are pretty good judges of their child's behavior over time. And so if you have a concern, I would take it to an expert, but realize that that expert's only seeing your child for maybe 10 minutes,
Very
20
short
minutes,
period of time.
and that
Okay.
they may not see the same things you see. So in that 10 or 20 minutes, they might see really typical behavior and form a very different impression of your child than you do, because you live with your child
And you're
all
in
the
a
time.
clinical setting, possibly,
Right,
rather
it's
than
very
in your home
unfamiliar,
environment.
right?
Okay.
So it's important to give that expert all of the information that you have. Fill them in on what the child's like at home. Do some online screeners. Get all of that additional information to give the expert, and that helps them get the whole picture of the child, not just the 10 minutes that might be typical behavior.
That's it that we're watching for.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you do have long enough samples of behavior, and that we trust parents to know what's going on with their kids.
Why is it so hard to diagnose autism?
Because autism is a condition that develops over time, and as a person goes through their life, it actually looks different in these various times of their life. So we can see autism developing very slowly. That's why we're doing research in baby siblings, because we're hoping we're looking at autism in its very, very earliest signs before there are enough signs that people are concerned. We're trying to look at those very, very early signs to see what they are, because they can be very subtle. And like I said, there's a lot of typical behavior mixed in. So you can see a child who's typical most of the time, and then once in a while you'll see an atypical thing that makes you wonder, but then it goes away. And then as you add those up in your mind, though, you start to form the impression, no, there really is something.
Get a full picture of what
Right.
we're looking at. We have a great graphic. See whether
Yeah.
you can explain that
So I'm going to try and explain it. This is work actually done by Dr.
And you
Gabrielson.
collaborate all the time,
Sure,
so
Yeah,
okay.
this was work done with a number of people throughout the state, including pediatricians and researchers at the University of Utah. So what they did was take experts in diagnosing autism, Teresa and other experts, and they gave sort of a 10-minute video clip of a child with autism or without autism.
Very
They had, very young, different people mixed in, and said, what do you think? Is this a child that's going to be diagnosed with autism or not?
And the graph shows us.
Yeah, so what's interesting here is these are kids that did have autism, and these are the number of people that said yes or no, and if we sort of split them, I think about half of the time they thought, oh yes, we both agree that that's autism. Some of the time they said nobody thought they had autism, and then sometimes they were mixed here in the middle.
Okay,
And-
should I be disconcerted by all the different answers?
well, no, the clue here is not that we can't diagnose autism. The clue is that we need more time than 10 minutes.
Okay.
And then we need more information. We
Yeah.
need that information the parents can give. We need some screening instruments. We just need a more comprehensive picture of a child than you can get in a 10-minute sample
And
of
that's,
behavior.
I would think that would be helpful for any health condition,
Yes.
right? The more information you can
Right.
bring, the better the diagnosis and the better tools we can do. Once a child or an adult has been diagnosed with autism, what is the next step? Because that in itself is daunting. What would you recommend the next steps would be?
I have favorite recommendations that I give, and one of them is to call the Utah Parent Center. They're a fabulous resource. These are parents who have walked down the path that you are just starting on, and they can be a shoulder to cry on. They can help you know where to go, who to talk to, what the next step is, and they know it well enough that they can give it to you in manageable bites.
And I would think as a parent that would be hugely
Yes.
helpful. We also have a graphic here that talks about some of those other resources that are out there. Walk me through that. Early intervention or school, when is that appropriate? And
So the early intervention or school is the system that's accessible to everybody. Early intervention is 0 to 3, and the school system is 3 to, in some cases, 21 years old, where we have access to intervention and professionals without cost that can help children learn. That's
so
their
first
job.
step, look for early intervention programs that are available
Sure,
to you.
and that in Utah it's called Baby Watch. Every state has their own. You want to partner with your pediatrician because there's a lot of conditions that are very frequently occurring with autism. There might be gastrointestinal symptoms that your pediatrician can help with. There are a lot of sleep problems, and there are often seizures. And all of these are things that the pediatrician can help manage.
And going back, sorry, just
No,
to
go.
the earlier point, is that pediatricians often have a limited amount of time to see kids, and so the American Academy of Pediatrics really recommends that if there's any concern at all, then children be referred on to specialists to look more at the signs of
And again,
autism.
getting the bigger picture. A behavioral specialist, when does that person come into play?
Behavioral specialists have such a wide range of things that they can address, and most people with autism at some point can benefit from the services of behavior specialists. So it might be something like teaching a child social play, or it might be teaching a child to sit in a chair, or it might be toilet training. There is such a broad range of behavioral services
on the child and the adult.
that a BCBA can offer.
What is BCBA versus behavioral specialist?
So a board-certified behavior analyst is a BCBA. That's one of the highest levels of training in behavior analysis. And if they are supervising the case, then you have a lot of confidence that they're doing it correctly.
Right, we're looking for the BCBA if possible. Speech and language pathology, why is that a part of the picture?
So by definition, impaired communication is part of the diagnosis of autism. And it includes different kinds of speech problems. So we know that many children struggle to pronounce their R's and their L's and their S's.
And that's more about articulation
Right.
challenges.
Right.
Sure.
But in autism, it often goes beyond that. We call pragmatic communication, sort of the turn-taking and knowing how to approach someone, when to speak, when to listen, rules like that. And so many times speech pathologists will work on those things with children diagnosed with
But
autism.
language is also something that is often impaired in autism, and so a speech-language pathologist can be the therapist that helps your child learn how to speak and how to talk and use verbal language.
I've seen children after receiving speech pathology see their anger and their anxiety drop down as they finally have a bridge to be able to express what they want to.
Yes, absolutely.
Occupational therapist, what is that and how does that help?
Oh, there's so many things that an occupational therapist can do. So the sensory sensitivities that a lot of people with autism have, an occupational therapist can help them manage those sensitivities a little bit better. A lot of people with autism have difficulty with handwriting, a lot of difficulty with handwriting. An occupational therapist can help with
And that's
that.
a fine motor skill.
Oh,
Yeah. We also see, as Teresa mentioned, sensory sensitivities, which could be hyposensitivities, where they're seeking out sensory stimulation, grabbing things, touching things, putting things in their mouth, and hypersensitivity. They might be sensitive to noises and put their hands over their ears, and so.
Or overhead lights.
Yeah.
Just too much stimulation
Right.
for them, so they help them cope with that. How about a social worker or care coordinator?
Boy, a parent would love to have someone help them wander through the maze and just let them know what's available. Part of the daunting task a parent faces is they don't know the range of services that are available. And unfortunately,
This is a navigator
right,
for you.
the Utah Parent Center is one of the best central resources for that, because they can say, okay, do you have this, do you have this, do you have this, and what about this? And the parent can say, wow, we never even knew about that. Thank you so much. So a social worker or care coordinator can take that role as well.
Wonderful. Parent support, you mentioned that at the Utah Parent Center. Let's talk about why is it
So,
so essential to have that support?
I'm going to put parent support and respite care
Together.
sort of
Okay.
together.
I would
A part of our team at BYU Autism Connect has recently published research showing, where we asked moms and dads separately, this is important, and we asked them about their respite care and found that for every hour of respite care, a week that parents had where they don't have to worry about the child.
Someone else is
taking
Their
care.
trusted care. I
Yeah.
can
Trusted
relax.
care.
Both moms and dads report less stress in their lives, more sort of daily uplifts, positive things, and increased marital satisfaction. So
Those are powerful
yeah.
indicators that that
Less
is a good
depression,
thing.
yes.
So we need to reach out, get the
Oh,
help
yeah.
that we need, and get the respite that we need as well. We have an email, and we appreciate all the comments that are coming in. This coming in from Dwight. Why is autism awareness so centered around autism experts, autism therapists, and autism caretakers like parents, and so little around listening to what the people who actually have autism have to say? Dwight, that is a very important question. Thank you for that. What's your
yeah,
answer to
that's
that?
a really
point.
important question to ask. And I will say that we meet every week to talk about these things, and we often talk. In fact, just last week we were talking about what can we do to listen more to the perspectives of people who have autism, understanding that some aren't really able to tell us, and some are able to tell us quite a lot. So I think that's been neglected over the years. There's a lot more work now in research and clinical practice to really do try to listen more to the experiences of people who have autism. I think we're doing better.
And we do include, and he's now graduated, but we had a student with autism who began working with us, and we would really love to find another student who could work with us and advise us and give us that inside look.
And even as you invite that, what is your email address in case someone like Dwight or
Sure.
someone we may know wants to give
We
them
would love to. It's autism@byu.edu.
And the phone is rung, and we've got a call coming in from Sandy. And Sandy, thank you for joining us on Ask 11. What's your question?
No, I have a grandson that's autistic, and I would really like to know what is the cause of so many children being born autistic, where they're found out when they're 5 months old, 10 months old, 2 years old, 5 years old. I mean, what is causing this major thing that's happening among children in this country?
Sandy, thank you for your call. You can hear your passion and your love for your grandchild. So we talked in the beginning about that, but there is a concern that nationally and around the world we're seeing this increase. What are your thoughts about what is causing that?
Well, we know some things. We know that there are a lot of cases of autism that are genetic. They run in families.
Okay.
We know that there might be something environmental. We're looking at that. There are researchers in California who are vacuuming homes and gathering particulates and everything that a family's exposed to.
Looking for environmental triggers.
For any kind
Sure,
of environmental trigger to see if there's something that interacts with that genetic susceptibility that makes it so we see autism. We wish we knew, because if we knew, we could do something about it. But we don't know. There's multiple causes. It might be like cancer, where there's multiple pathways and there's no single cause.
But research is ongoing.
We're doing a lot of
for
research
that
trying
cause.
to.
I hope that helps as we think about you, Sandy. We have an email that came in. Despite support for parents of autistic children and autistic children themselves, why are there no such groups for autistic adults in Utah? Where are the portrayals of autistic adults in the public attention of autism? And why aren't they advocating for themselves at the Utah legislature and in their local communities? And this is a 50-year-old Utahn with autism.
Sure.
Thank you. So he's asking for engagement.
Well, I'm going to say there's good news, because there are some groups available now. I want to especially talk about a couple of programs for younger adults. The UVU Passages program and the Aggies Elevated program at Utah State have sort of programs to help people transitioning from high school into college who might be affected by symptoms of autism, to make that transition a little better. Scenic View Academy, which is in Provo at the mouth of Provo Canyon, has sort of ongoing support groups during the day, as well as residential services for adults on the autism spectrum to get. And I'm going to say that there probably is a need for people with autism to band together to find each other and to make up some support groups.
What about that question he had about lobbying at the legislature, looking for more support financially for grants, research, et cetera?
That's a great idea, and the Autism Council of Utah would be the best place to start. So I would suggest you contact Autism Council of Utah. They would love to have you work with them.
Anyone engaged,
in the
empowered
legislature?
in this cause?
Absolutely.
The University of Utah is also doing a lot of work with autism in adults. And I would say it's one of the hotter topics right now in autism, in the autism community, because all these families that started 20 years ago with very young children now have children who are adults. And so that's their biggest priority.
And I just got an email, sorry, about an adult employment. There's a day-long workshop for adults with autism looking for employment, and I don't remember the details. It came from Dr. Bill McMahon, who's coordinating that at University of Utah.
But if that gentleman wants to reach you, you can email at
Yep, we'll
again,
get back. I have the
autism-
details on my
Email
email.
us and we'll get you the
autism@byu.edu and get information from both Teresa and Michael as well. We have another email that came in, this one from Collins. I have some anti-vaxxer friends who believe autism is caused by the shots you need in order to eat school lunch. All immunizations. Boy, this has been a hot topic. And she won't take no for an answer. What do you do with those individuals who, out of fear and misinformation, are not immunizing their children?
Well, I think there's two things. And one is that there's a lot of things we don't know about autism, but there is one thing we do know, and it's that immunizations do not cause autism. The science has proven that over and over again in a way we wish we had certainty on the causes.
On the other causes, sure.
Right. And then the other thing is there's the parents in this generation don't have the memories of my generation of how deadly those diseases can be.
Measles
and how
mumps,
devastating they can be, and
There
how
have
much
been recent
damage
outbreaks.
they can cause. And so I understand that they would not want to do the immunizations because they've not seen those diseases. I remember those diseases and how awful they are and how lethal some of them can be and how much damage. And so for me, it's much easier for me to say, yes, please get the immunizations because those diseases are so deadly.
They took our
and
lives, they paralyzed
and they're
us.
coming back because we don't have as much protection in society as we used to.
So maybe that is one tactic that you can use when you talk to someone. It's about the risk it brings to your own children in our community.
Sure.
I wanted to also go back. You started talking about your favorite places to go for resources. One of them you mentioned is Utah Parent Center. What is another favorite resource for us to turn anyone who has questions about autism to?
So when I see families and we diagnose them with autism, I always put the Utah Parent Center down as a resource.
Right.
This is parents helping parents, so it's parents who've been through the
been there,
system
done
and have
that,
children,
and-
right? I always put the Autism Speaks toolkits that Teresa talked about. There's a favorite of mine that's called the First 100 Days Toolkit, which is what happens when you get a diagnosis with autism, what happens next.
Walks you through.
It also educates you about what autism is because a lot of parents need that information.
And especially because from what I'm learning today is it means a lot of things.
Yes.
It's right. And so in my child's situation, what does it mean at this age versus as he or she grows older?
There are additional toolkits at Autism Speaks for toilet training and sleep and for adults.
And behavior.
And behavior, many things like
Going
that.
to the dentist.
And then you had one more, birth to 5?
Yeah, birth to 3 and birth to 5. I would just add that's for the younger children. Now there are not as many resources for older people, but as we said, Passages program and
That Passages program at Utah
Yeah,
Valley University is incredible, and I love what they're doing for adults 18 to 40 to help them move on and transition into adulthood. We have more time to take more of your questions and emails. I hope you'll continue to send them in. Ask 11 continues with more of your questions after this short break.
We have no problem in meetings.
Well, welcome back as we talk on Ask 11 about autism. Take your questions, your emails, your tweets. Our handle is of course, at KBYU, and we welcome your questions. Autism seems to play havoc on our emotions. Let's talk a little bit about the interplay between anxiety and emotions within the autism spectrum.
Sure. One thing I noticed when I was in graduate school at the University of Utah, and we had children with autism would come for a social skills group, and they would meet together. And I would meet with the parents who dropped their children off. They were hanging around, and so we had about 20 parents in a group at a table, and I mostly just listened. And what I heard the parents talking a lot was all the worries their children had, problems with transitions, lots of rigid behaviors, and just really so much anxiety. And so I've spent a lot of my research program actually trying to understand how anxiety looks in autism. Is it different than when you have anxiety without autism? And what are sort of the brain mechanisms underlying that?
We have a graphic. Let's take a look at this. So what does that graphic tell us?
Sure.
about
This is
autism?
from a study of ours a few years ago, and we just gave a questionnaire. I like it. It's called the SCARED questionnaire to ask
Okay.
about anxiety in children.
Simple enough,
Yep.
right?
And this is asking parents about anxiety in children. We see here the autism group in blue is actually right off the cutoff for an anxiety disorder on this questionnaire. And this is just the average, so some are above and some are below. And then our typical children without autism, they're much lower. So this is just showing just this really high amount.
Again, discomfort about any change, not
Yes.
feeling confident about moving into situations, social situations,
Exactly.
manifesting as anxiety.
Yeah.
And it happens much less prevalent in children who have not been diagnosed with autism.
Yes.
So being sensitive to that would be important. We do have an email that has come in, an anonymous. My 26-year-old son is high functioning and wishes he could find a girlfriend, but his dates are typically limited to just one date. How can he best present himself to find and keep a girlfriend? And isn't that an important question as well?
It is.
Teresa, let's talk about that.
That's part of why we do so much work in social skills earlier on, and I call what he's looking for is what I call advanced social skills. So it goes beyond how to have a conversation. It goes beyond how to trade information, and it goes into how to really understand what another person might need or want in a relationship, and those are harder to teach.
Are there resources for a 26-year-old adult with high functioning who wants to be able to develop more of those interpersonal skills?
Yeah, actually, Scenic View Academy has a sort of little workbook they've put out for some basic social skills, including some advanced social skills. Again, if you email us, we'll hook you up with the right people.
Okay.
I also just found, the question was asked earlier about like Hollywood portrayals. There are several movies, including one called Adam, which I watched recently, about a guy with probably high-functioning autism.
Was it a respectful portrayal?
Yeah, it really was, and I think realistic to some situations. It's Hollywood, of course. But one thing that I noticed was the woman he was dating trying to help him build some of those skills. So she was patient with him, but also trying to teach him, here's what you do in this situation.
Some skills that we might have already intuitively developed need to be taught step by step.
Well, they need to be practiced.
Oh, practice
This is
first
what he's-
before the big day comes.
Right,
Okay,
right.
we have another email. I appreciate that answer, by the way. This coming in from Greg. Are there greater instances of drug abuse, lack of motivation to drive, lack of confidence, obsessions with games, for example, in adults with autism? Are there risk factors?
I can talk about driving.
Okay.
Driving is, from the people who have autism that tell me about driving, it's very exhausting. There's so much coming at, so much information coming at you at the same time, and driving can be very unpredictable, which makes it extremely uncomfortable.
The
So it's
sensory
it's
issues and the
exhausting.
anxiety.
So it's common for
everything
adults with
like that.
autism to want to avoid that
Absolutely. It's
experience.
Very hard.
Yeah.
What about the obsession with video games and board games?
That would be you.
Again, emotional out, right? Is it?
Yeah, I'm going to, first of all, go back and say we're going to skip the drug abuse question because I don't actually know the answer to that.
Okay.
But certainly driving and obsessions with video games, yes, especially these days, Minecraft. But remembering that people with autism aren't the only ones that are obsessed with video games.
Everyone
There's a lot of
is
people that are
just
obsessed with
about,
video games.
right.
But it might be more of an outlet, especially to connect online with people. There are whole websites devoted to watching other people play video games.
It's a safe, easy way to navigate the social interactions and get rewards.
And it's fairly predictable. A video game is. Part of the reason we don't know about substance abuse is that it might be that people who have substance abuse problems might be undiagnosed
Okay.
with autism, so we just don't know.
All right, still an area that we need to get more research in. Anne has emailed us, and we appreciate that. Here's what she's asking. What are some things that extended family members can do to help support a child with autism, specifically if their interactions are time limited? That's an interesting question. Number one, outside family, and number two, limited time. What do you think?
This is crucial if there is anything that outside family members can do. Remember, we talked earlier about the respite care. So if grandma or grandpa or uncle or aunt can come in and take the kids for a couple hours, but also just the understanding, parenting a child with autism can be a very lonely thing. If you take a child with obvious physical disabilities to a grocery store and they throw a fit, then people are going to come to your aid and offer sympathy. But autism is a silent condition, and so you just have a lot of people asking you all the time, why can't you parent your child? And so having family members come and just offer that support is really key for parents.
What about the question of limited time?
If you have limited time, enjoy the child first, let the parents know that you do like and love your grandchild, but also support the parents. The parents are your children, and they need you to support them because they feel very lonely, and they want to know that you've got their back and that you can give them some of your time.
I know that in my nephew's situation, when he was an early diagnosis, to interact with him was to get down on the floor and play the games that he wanted to play. And that was what brought him the most joy. We have a question coming in from Facebook. This coming in from Julie. My 7-year-old son has autism. What are some ideas, places that have info on strategies on how to deal with his frustrations turning into aggressive hitting or kicking behavior if he doesn't win or if he's not first, especially, and some that I'm not even sure what causes the frustration? Let's talk about that.
We're working on that quite a bit at BYU to find some of those answers. But generally, when we see a child that has that frustration when things don't go his or her way, we have to teach them that it's rewarding to allow someone else to have their own way. And we need to teach them how to adapt when things don't go their way. So that's part of what a behavior analyst can do. And it's part of what parents can join with the behavior analyst in teaching the child in the moment.
I would think that it would be important for the parents to be mentored by that behavioral right specialist, because we don't know. We have not been trained as you have been on how to be able to create rewards for positive behavior and how to help deter the behavior that is destructive. Is it common at 7 and 8 as they get older to display the frustration physically?
Yeah, I think one thing, we're going to bring up another slide here. So this is work, it's not been published yet, it's just out by our autism group.
Breaking news on Ask 11,
Yeah, well, we always have to see what the reviewers think of it. But we have specifically looked at children who have autism and some who have more aggressive behaviors and some who don't. So we sort of split them into...
so what are we looking at?
Yeah, so this is a high aggression group over here, and this is a low aggression group. Both of the groups have autism, but some of them are more aggressive. Now what this graph is actually the volume, the size of their brainstem, sort of at the base of the brain. And so what we see here is that our low aggression group has more brainstem volume than our low aggression group. So there's a difference in size. And that's interesting for us.
Make a child more reactive?
Well, yeah. So one thing we know that happens in brainstem is that's one of the production centers for serotonin. We've all heard of serotonin. Sort of regulates mood, and so what we think might be happening is that the children with autism aren't regulating their moods as well. And so there's more frustration, more aggression. And so when we try and figure out what's going on in their brains like this, then we can think about future things.
May I add real quick, Teresa, I would think that I'd be more compassionate towards my child or my adult child if I knew that there may be a physical component, which is what we're learning about autism anyways, rather than to be so frustrated. And it's hard on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yes. Well, part of it is just because the brains work differently, physiologically or not. It's hard for us to understand, and this question echoed that. I don't know why he's so frustrated. So getting to know the child better and knowing what might be frustrating for him and teaching him the communication skills to let us know can help us help him to solve some of his problems.
As you mentioned, speech pathologist with a speech and behavior consultant as well. We have Kaisha on the phone right now. Kaisha, thank you for calling Ask 11. What's your question tonight?
I wanted to know about strategies to help manage my marriage and the other children in the family when I have a severely autistic child in my home.
Great question, because you talked about the effect this has on. So the question about how do we manage our relationships, because the autistic child with autism is creating some...
But there are other siblings as well who are going to have their own needs. Again, there are a few community resources, not a lot. There's a SIB Shops program. Many places have it. Utah County has a SIB Shops program that meets...
SIB is short for sibling.
Yeah, S-I-B shop. And they meet once a week on Saturdays, once a month, on Saturdays. And it's just a place for siblings who have siblings with disabilities to come and hang out, to do some fun activities, to talk, to process with each other.
So that's one support for the siblings. What about in the marriage? Because that child with autism may be taking more emotional and physical time than what is left over for the spouse.
Autism does happen to a family, not an individual. And so a lot of families find help in just a marriage therapist or a family therapist that can help them work through some of the issues that are growing as they're trying to take care for this child that marriage therapist can help you work through, and that you can actually solve while you are taking care
and help
of your
validate
child.
those real emotions
Absolutely,
that everybody's
absolutely.
experiencing in the house. An email came in. Let's ask this. Are there residential programs for adults with severe autism who can't live on their own?
Yes, there are, but they're often not called autism residential centers. They're often just called adult residential centers.
Right.
So there may be people with autism and other individuals with other types of
Do you have
disabilities.
an opinion on
who
that
live
as to
together.
whether or
Well,
not?
they tend to be sort of small group homes.
Okay.
I don't know in Utah if we have a sort of really large center, not that I know of, for adults in that situation. So I often tell parents that you need to visit and with the person who's affected by autism, and everyone needs to get a feel. Am I going to be comfortable here? Is this a good place for me to be? We don't recommend any one place, but really that people look for the fit.
Do the investigation and be on top
and
of
definitely
that.
visit.
We've got a call coming in from Doug in Utah Valley. Doug, welcome to Ask 11. Thank you for calling. What's your question?
Not really a question as much as when you were addressing the games playing by autistic people.
Yes.
Sometimes going out and playing board games, or if you get involved in role-playing games or something, it's a chance to socialize without the stricture of, say, dating.
Yes.
To get a chance to know people. And I'm also a high-functioning autistic.
Yeah.
So
That's a great
I
point,
wasn't
Doug.
diagnosed till I was 30, but I had it my whole life, and now I know why I was a little bit different.
But you're aware of the importance of developing emotional relationships or social relationships with others and games. It's a great suggestion.
Sure. Some game stores will have like weekly game nights or maybe even nightly game nights, and there are also Lego nights where people can go, and so finding groups like that I think is a great idea.
It's great to find a common interest, and that's a very typical common interest.
I appreciate that call, Doug. We have an email that has come in from Bridget. What support is there for spouses of adults with autism? How about support for other neurotypical family members like children? It's been hard to find support groups and therapists who actually understand how to help. Why is it hard to find a therapist that's hard to help? Let's start there. Is it we don't have enough experience?
Partly it's because when a lot of the experts have come up through their training, autism was not a part of their training. So they just don't have enough background. What they've learned from handling their current clientele, so that's part of the reason.
Okay. And are there support groups?
There are a few, not a lot. The University of Utah offers some services, and there's a local social worker in town who will meet with spouses of people diagnosed with autism. So again, I think if people contact us, and if people know of more resources, please send them in to us. We'll pass them along.
But also the Utah Parent Center.
Go there as well. And again, your email is autism@byu.edu.
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's a great way. Tell me what we're looking at on the graphic. Earlier, we're looking at the brainstem differences of children with autism, those without. What are we looking at here? What does this mean?
Yeah, so this is again trying to figure out where is the anxiety come from. And these are adults with autism and compared to adults without autism. Now we know that this little region here called amygdala is very important for learning about fear, for learning when to be afraid and sort of evaluating this is safe, this is not safe. And we know that many people who get diagnosed with anxiety disorders have more activation in this amygdala. So what we did here was we had a little threat and safe condition. You just saw a different color on the screen, a blue square or a yellow square. And when you saw the blue square, you might get a burst of air just on your neck. It's not painful, but it's surprising. And so we know that amygdala should be involved in learning that when I see that blue square, oh no, I might get this puff of air on the neck. So then we evaluated what was going on in the brains of people diagnosed with autism, the brains of people not diagnosed with autism. And we actually found, if we bring this up, that what this yellow blob is that we're looking at is that people without autism are showing more activation when they're looking at the threat than the safe color on the screen. So I see the puzzle on your head. Yeah. So
obviously you're going to have to define that for me or explain that.
We had the same puzzle on our brows when you did. But looking at this and other research, what our current thinking is that many people with autism have a hard time knowing when to be safe and when to be afraid. And so what we're showing in the amygdala there is a lack of really differentiation of it's okay to be safe now. And so what this might lead to in everyday life, if you don't know when to be when to feel safe, it's to be constantly on alert. So that's one idea we're working with to say that maybe it's the difficulty knowing when it's okay that's leading to all this anxiety.
Let's talk about loud noises, because you mentioned earlier sensory sensitivity. We have a graphic that talks or shows us about what happens, the arousal within the body.
Yes, this is literally hot off the presses, so sorry, clear off myself there. This is data we're just analyzing this week, and let me just explain it. This red line here is a group of adults without autism. This is actually BYU students.
Okay.
And what's happening here is they're listening to a simple tone.
Okay.
Sorry for the noise, but it goes like this. Boop, just like that. Okay. 2 seconds, okay? In earphones. 2 seconds, about 60 decibels, which is the loudness of a TV, an average TV. And what we see is when they start over here, this is their pupil dilation, so this is the size of their pupils.
Okay.
It's a little bigger, but then over time, over 10 trials, it decreases. Okay. Now this is a group of people with anxiety disorders who also start a little higher than the other group, but they also, if I can draw this here, all right, it's not
looking at the blue line?
Yeah.
Looking at the blue line, yep.
Okay.
Looking at the blue line. They also start high, but then they learn over time it's safe now.
Not to react as much. Okay.
In the autism group, which is the green line now, they start even a little higher. And what we notice is over the course of those 10 trials, they aren't calming down as much. Their pupils are staying big. So it's another idea here that they're in a constant state of threat. Even when they should be learning, it's okay now, it's okay now.
Okay, so we learn from that, and before that gets published, that those who have been diagnosed with autism might be in a higher state of alert for a longer period of time, might be suffering with more anxiety. What do we do with that? If we're an adult with autism, how do we move forward to manage that?
So people with autism can benefit from the same type of treatment that people with anxiety do. We just may need to tweak it a little bit so that it fits the mind of someone who has autism.
Are you talking about anti-anxiety medications or behavioral changes or both?
Both.
Okay.
Both. And when we're working with them, we just have to have a different mindset to know what they'll react to and what will make sense to them. So they'll say, oh, yeah, I can do that.
Are there counselors who help specifically work with adults with autism to identify these behaviors?
Well, I think we're working to raise awareness, and I think there are some counselors coming to this now. I want to point out a good example recently that the Woodbury Art Museum that's here in the University Mall in Provo, sponsored by UVU, they held an autism art exhibition. So all the art was made by people, young people and older people who've been diagnosed with autism. And as I walked in to see it, what I noticed is in the back corner, they had a quiet room. And they had some headphones, they had a yoga mat, they had a chair. And so that if people were feeling overwhelmed by this big sensory environment, they could simply go there, take some time out. And we often recommend to people they can take a time out in school or time out at home.
And all of us can practice that same healthy right to take a time out and be aware of how our body is reacting. We have an email that's come in from Rose. Rose, thank you. My daughter was diagnosed at 19. She is high functioning, but has been a picky eater, but has gotten worse with time. Is there a course that we can take to help her? It is a lot with textures. Rose, a lot of individuals have that similar experience. I know my nephew with autism also did it. It took a little while to convince him to start opening his eyes. So how do we work with that? So
that can be part of the sensory involvement with autism. It can also be behaviorally reinforced. And when you think about an individual with autism who really feels comfortable when things are predictable, then food choice becomes more and more comfortable when it's more and more predictable.
Okay.
So the range of acceptable foods can gradually decrease. So what we need to do is work with that individual to gradually increase the range, and gradual is probably the key here.
So 2 or 3 foods they're comfortable with, introducing one.
Introducing and just expanding their repertoire, if you will, of foods. But it takes a lot of behavioral reinforcement because they don't want, she doesn't want to do that. It's not comfortable, so we have to make it really good and a really good deal for her to do that.
Are there courses around that?
So I just gave a talk in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago.
That's
and there was
far away, though.
there was a workshop on the same day though by someone that Teresa knows from Children's Hospital at Philadelphia.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and she has, I think they call it buffet or something. They have a fancy acronym, and it's a lot of this is taking foods that you like and then learning to talk about it, learning to think about it, learning to to try little things at a time. And gradually over the course of 8 weeks, the kids, they're 8 to 10-year-olds, get much more brave to try new things, and they see, oh, that's not so bad. So it's just a gradual process. But there are programs, again, that one's just under development, but I think more is coming.
And I love that. And again, going back to the Utah Parent Center, there might be other parents who've had similar experiences that might have more advice for you. Another email's come in. Here's a great question. Is there a relationship between autism and ADD or ADHD? I'm seeing head nods already.
Yes.
So
several relationships. ADD or ADHD does happen very frequently. People with autism, and we talked before about people with autism paying attention to different things. People with autism are often easily distracted by all of these different things they're paying attention to. So that's part of ADHD. The hyperactivity can be part of autism too.
We might also see poor social skills in people that have ADHD, maybe not autism, but sort of if you're too busy and distracted by other things, it's going to be hard to kind of hang in there for
be a good play partner.
One of the things I'm concerned about is a parent watching right now or an adult who's high functioning with autism feeling a little overloaded. There's a lot that we're talking about. We could have some speech, and social, delays. We could also have struggles with focusing. So that sense of where do we go from here? What are the steps that we can take to identify how to move forward on this? What would you say?
I mean, in diagnosis?
Yeah, in diagnosis.
We're worried about our child and we don't know if he has autism.
Yes.
There's a lot on the internet that's not very helpful. One of my favorite places to go on the internet is the Centers for Disease Control. They have a page about autism. It's mostly geared toward younger children, but if you go to Autism Speaks, there is a toolkit? There's a section there for diagnosis in older adolescents and young adults. So you can look at what autism looks like in those individuals, and it's harder to tell when people get older, I think.
And that's one of your specialties, right? You also work with diagnosis of adults, not just
not just kids.
So what are you looking for when you are being introduced to an adult who may or may not have?
Yeah, so in fact, I just received a call today from the father of a 43-year-old who struggled all his life. But what we look at is, I think, how much some of the symptoms, which might include ADHD and anxiety, but also social difficulty making eye contact, maybe an overfocus on some specific issues, how much that affects their ability to succeed. Are they able to work? The father who called in today, the child lives, he's an adult. He lives at home with them. He's had a job for a while, but they're downsizing in the company, and he's really worried that the company's going to let him go, and they're sort of looking for an excuse to let him go. So we really look at how much is it disrupting their ability to get along in life.
Or have a relationship.
Yes.
So if it's interfering with that ability to get the education, the job, the relationships, then you need to look to see whether or not autism may be at the root of that. Earlier you brought up the UVU's Passages program for, I believe, ages 18 to 40. And not only do they have services there to help adults transition to independence, but they also help the students manage some of the skills required to have a higher education. So what else do you know about the Passages program?
I think you've described it well. They also have fun activities, right? Social activities. So I'll say that we had a screening of Star Wars the day before it came out, and we had like 30 people from the Passages program that came. I also do want to mention the Scenic View Academy, which has both residential services and day services, outpatient services. Again, to build on those skills a little at a time. You get a job, you get a place to live, you eat there, and they work closely, Scenic View and Passages work closely together to just try and practice those skills.
These are things that other people would learn just by picking them up from their environment, but the people with autism aren't paying attention, perhaps, and so we need to directly instruct them, here's how to do this. And
we have
benefit from
just a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to ask the financial question. Are there resources for parents with children with autism?
There are some things that are improving. Insurance coverage is improving from what it used to be. Medicaid now covers autism services, which is a big help to families who really have very little resources. Utah Parent Center is a great source of how you can get this paid for, how you can get this paid for, how you can apply for this service that will give you funding. So it's a complicated web, but there are resources out there.
And the most important thing is to reach out and try to get the resources.
And there are some others, and with these adults, we might try and get them hooked up with Department of Workforce Services, vocational rehabilitation, supplemental Social Security income. the people who were shown in the beginning video, I know at the beginning of this program, are really working with their insurance company, say, hey, there's nothing around here to cover this, so what are you going to do? That's an ongoing process, but many families have to work through this process.
How prevalent is autism in Utah versus national numbers?
Utah has traditionally been ranked like 1 or 2 in the prevalent studies. This year it's number 3. But we're just still holding stable. It's about 1 in 58 in Utah.
It's, I mean, the top sites are all at about the same level, and a lot of it comes down to really who's keeping records, where you're getting your sources from. I've heard it said that in Utah, because we have both health and education records, it's probably about a 30% increase in the number of kids just because they're coming from different sources.
So the national rate is 1 in 68.
1 in 68, and we're slightly
above that.
1 in 58.
All right. And what do you think that tells us as a community in terms of our need to be aware? You know, when we find out that it's that common, that 1 in 58 seems common.
We need to invest in resources. We had the caller said, let's go to the legislature. Yes, let's go to the legislature. That's how the insurance companies have turned around, is that states passed laws that said insurance companies have to cover autism services.
It was because of lobbying, and active engagement, and trying to get community leaders and legislatures to be empathetic, right? Often we're not able to develop that empathy till we've experienced it ourselves. It's been wonderful to have you tonight. I wanted, for anyone else who might have a follow-up question, again, how can we reach you?
autism@byu.edu. That's an email that comes to both of us.
Okay, thank you so much for what you do ongoing throughout the community and for us tonight. Teresa and Michael, we want to thank everyone else who's joined us tonight, and we'll continue to have more resources for our audience with Ask 11. The BYU Autism Connect webpage is a great resource to learn more. Just search BYU and autism to find it online. You can watch this program again at your convenience. Visit the KBYU 11 YouTube channel, where we'll be posting this episode of Ask 11 in the next few days. From YouTube, search KBYU 11 to find the channel. Then search Ask 11 within the channel to find this program. I'm Rebecca Cressman. Thanks to all who've called in or sent us messages. Thank you for being a part of Ask 11. Have a great night. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.